kind of the story of where we are with a lot of the work that I've been doing with youth, and then work with the knowledge shared from our elders in our communities. I'm from Blackfeet country. I was born and raised in Browning, and then moved around 3 high schools and ended up in Harlem and graduated out of there with Connie Foster, was a fellow 92er. So
go Wildcats!
But I've been in Indian country my whole life, and it's been very interesting. So when I went to work at OPI, it was a tough change moving from the tribal side of things to the state for various reasons. But it's an exciting program that I've been a part of with some people that really want to make some change out there for Indian country. These are some of the statistics. Eric Meredith, I work with him, he's the data guy. You can get a full report on that link below. This is the kind of the 2 projects that I'm a part of. The Schools of Promise, I think everybody in here has been a part of that in one way or the other. But we really look to provide those supports and in a lot of ways help build that infrastructure. In the school climate, I looked at this in a little bit more on bringing more of our tribal support systems within our schools. And I look at school climate as kind of an individual student initiative where we're trying to build our students up from the inside. These are our graduate rates over the last 5 years. And we work on that with Schools of Promise. We work on all the types of professional development. These are our dropout rates. You guys probably, have you seen these? It doesn't look too good in a lot of ways. So where I came from at Tribal Leaders Council, I worked with youth development, tribal youth programs, and suicide prevention. I worked suicide prevention for about 6-7 years. And in Indian country, on our reservations. So it's difficult for me to go to the state and sit and look at these things because of some of the issues that I was dealing with just with our youth and suicide. That attendance difficulty, I think that's come up quite a bit. This is where we're sitting on ACTs.
Donnie, while you're flipping through those, we'll get this presentation from Donnie and we will send it out to you so that you'll have your own copy of the updated data. So if you can email that to me, that would be great, and I'll get it on to them.
That was all for you, Joe.
That was?
Now this is my actual presentation.
I'm impressed. Now this is the rest of the story.
Now I can get into my presentation. But you know, you sit out there and you work with kids. I've worked with a lot of folks in here on our youth development. There's such a strength within our Native youth out there and helping them realize it. Coming up, driving up here, I brought my father, who's an old administrator, was in Browning, was in Harlem, Corvallis. He was an old coach. You look at where we find the most success in our reservation communities. It's usually through our athletics. What do we strive for and why? What do our kids want to be? They want to be state champions. They want to do these things like that. They want to go to NBA. And you look at that. Out there, you don't need resources. You don't need an infrastructure or money to be successful on the track or the basketball court and all these things. And I really looked at Schools of Promise. What we've been trying to do, we're already on equal footing, if not higher, with our reservation youth and athletics. Statistically, our tribal schools, I think, have won like 36% of state championships since like early 90s. So I look at that as we are pretty equal when it comes to athletics, because you don't need a lot of infrastructure. Schools of Promise is trying to bring that academics to be equal with the others in the state of Montana by, bringing in better infrastructure of the internet, better professional development, better support systems for administration and staff. All that hard work is to try to bring us up to an equal footing academically in our schools. And that's difficult, as most of you guys know. Because it takes a lot of money. It takes a lot of training. And I think that since we started in that first year, by working together, we're starting to see positive impacts. For those who were with us that first year, well, we've come a long ways. A lot of humility, a lot of humbling. You were running the whole thing. So.
I know. Left it to you.
But we've started to work more together between the districts and the OPI staff and city. And we're starting to see a little bit better improvement. And I look at the MBI piece in that school climate piece, the behavior of our students, where they are when they come into school after a tough weekend. That is more individual. A lot of those students, you talk to them, some of their biggest concern is safety. Where they are at night, safety in the school, connections. They want that compassion, and we always beat our head against, well, how do you teach compassion? Centered, we want our students to be centered in who they are, their identity. We work with them on life skills and personal development. That's a lot of the approach that we've done with our student leadership programs. And now with MBI School Climate, we're starting to look at expanding that. These are our suspension rates. So this is kind of where a lot of the discussions came. This MBI School Climate Grant started last year, and Susan Bailey Anderson runs it, and we have a good crew. They put me on there. I'm glad they put me on there. I don't know why or how I got on there, but all of the schools they're working with were in Indian country. So last year, in about October, we went to Chicago to the grantee meetings in Chicago on this climate grant. And they were talking about what are some new strategies or methods that we can use to better the outcomes for our Indian students in Indian country. How can we adapt MBI using some of the things that are out there? So we had a pretty exciting discussion. I brought up the fact that, and I'll get into it more, but the simple fact of how our Native youth act when they're around ceremony or when they're around elders, when they're around their settings, from where they're at. They're the most respectful kids you'll ever meet. They feed you, they handle the door, they do all these things. And then how it's kind of shocking when you go into the school system, you see how they act there. So you can see some of that. So I know most of you understand this, but I'll get into it a little bit more. These are things that I didn't realize a lot of people didn't know. That, our tribal nations have a unique relationship with the federal government. We're not a race, we're indigenous to this land. Those treaties that they signed are to have the highest authority. And those treaties to provide health, law, education, and they've never been fulfilled. We all know these battles out there, working with the tribal councils. Health, never been reached at the full level. Law, education. You know, and a lot of this colonization that's happened. And so I think that's sometimes very important for some folks to realize. And then you bring in the boarding schools. And again, I sit in Helena in these meetings and just trying to get people to understand why we're why we are where we are now. I bring up that analogy about if China took over America and went into your house and took your kids, took them somewhere and taught them Chinese and Chinese culture, well, you're home. If you ever practice your culture or your ways, you can get arrested or beat. Then, 6 years later, in comes your kid speaking an entirely different language, and you can't communicate with them anymore. It broke the whole structure that had been around for thousands of years. And you look at that's 1860, 1896. Acculturation. In a lot of our communities, you know, there is folks who are fully assimilated. They're successful. They went on. They get their degrees and they move in that way. You look at some of the other issues that happen, integration. That's where those folks are still centered in who they are, and they go out and they're very successful. In all honesty, I work with a lot of students, especially when dealing with drug, alcohol abuse, and suicide, that are lost. They don't know where they fit. You know, you see that how it's been passed down. And now with meth, with the high levels of issues on the reservations right now, I mean, it's all started from there. You know, I look at this number right here. You know, some of our urban students have the highest rates too, so this is where I was when I came walking into OPI. It's difficult to talk grades and graduation when you understand what our youth are going through daily. You know, I can relate to a lot of these things. A lot of my friends, you know, I mean, all of these things that you don't realize that is just kind of normal out there. And Kathy Charbonneau brought up reality, concepts and reality. And we have great concepts, but the reality is there's a lot of things that we're battling out there. So in a lot of this push, and I've been saying this I think since day one, you know, yeah, I want the kids to have better grades, but I want them to live a better and longer life too. I want them to get to next week. I want them to get to 30. If they get to age 30, statistically, they're going to be more successful. And so within my position, I kind of deal, you guys know who Sarah Pierce is. She deals with the academic standards. I deal with more on the touchy-feely guy. Emotions and connections. You guys know my mother. She's just like that, Connie. Raina was on my mother's drill team in Harlem. So my folks are a lot like that. We're starting to look at these things where we got ACE studies going on, trauma-informed schools. I wonder what has happened to them instead of what's wrong with them. You know, there's that shift in attitude that we have to start having. You guys know who Henrietta Mann is? He's a legend. And Jeremy McDonald is becoming a legend. He's coached at Box Elder. Jeremy was talking about what Henrietta Mann told him. The hardest journey is 14 inches. It's from your mind to your heart. It's the hardest journey we ever have in our life. And how we always have to keep that in We have to keep that heart in our decisions. I look at like everything I'm talking about now, it comes from someone else. It comes from our elders. It comes from those who impact it. I mean, everybody here will understand it. We have all these answers within Indian country. I look at my time, you know who Gordon Belfort is. He really connected me to my culture in Blackfeet. We would sit and we'd bring in elders and talk about what can we do to better the life of our children. And they would always say they need to connect to who they are. They'll always say those things. And when I grew up in Browning, all I ever seen was the Browning Indians win. You know, my dad was coaching cross country. They were always in state championships. So I always thought that, you know, and then I moved and I left that world. And then when you go back to the reservation, things are different. And you're like, man, I thought we could destroy everybody. And there's something that happened, but I still believe that. You know, I believe that, and I see it athletically, and I believe that we're going to start to come. There's a shift, and it doesn't matter who you're talking to around here. There's a shift that's bringing back a lot of native culture. And there's a reconnecting. Those seventh generation understanding that I'm sitting here because of everything that was done before me. And that's why I'm here. And I'm here now to change whatever's ahead of me. And the simple fact that a tree will not thrive without its roots. All of this links to, you know, connecting our kids to who they are. You guys read that? So a lot of our youth leadership, this is what we talk about. We talk about what wealth we have in our Indian communities. You know, they got those four kind of concepts of the physical. You look at how we are physically. I always joke with our kids and say, hey, you're quicker, you got those tighter tendons because you're faster, and we always joke about that. I won't get anymore. You guys know what I mean. But it's seen, you know. You look at our family, our community, the social aspect of our reservation, no matter how dysfunctional they are, there is something very beautiful about all that. I was up in Hayes Lodgepole when one of their students cut his hand. And I reminded those kids, because when you're there, you don't know. When you're on the reservation, yeah, it seems crazy, but you don't know what you got until you leave. And you're sitting there in a community, and everyone's got their doors locked, and their yards are all trimmed. No. Landscaping. And like, my dog's out running around, and I get called in. No, but all these things, when I hear those stories of family, wherever you go, you run into people from the reservations or people you know from out there. It's so good to see. You know, it's so good, and you realize, man, I miss you guys. And a lot of times we don't realize it. The fact that this young student cut his hand and didn't have enough, I heard he didn't have enough funds to get to Great Falls. He got home, and it was told to me that there was just a line of people handing money to the family to get in there. And these are people, they don't have a lot of money to do that. So that family structure, that it's still there. It's just still there, you know. You look at some of the spirituality, and I remind the kids that, you know, you have this right here. You just look for it. And the most difficult part is that self-actualization. You know, how can we better connect our youth to those ways before we lose it? A lot of our kids don't believe in that they feel like second-class citizens at times. And this has come up in our discussions around the My Voice survey, things like that. Then you ask them, well, would you ever say anything like that when you're going to play a basketball game and pick somebody? No, we'll beat them. But starting a business? No, I can't. Things like that, which is, there's no businesses out there. So then we look at, you know, a lot of the families out there that are still connected to some of those cultural ways, that identity, those strong connections that pass down through the family. You look at what immersion schools are now doing, reconnecting our kids to their language and culture. The tribal language, they got cultural camps. I know that Rainy Growing Thunder is doing amazing things in Fort Peck with that. And then the ceremonies and those practices that a lot of our kids get to. And then you look at statistically, you know, why do we have to go through tough times before we reconnect to that culture? I just lost my cousin last year to prescription drugs. He was 36. He was in Browning. He was there. He was doing good. He was practicing his culture every day. Went back to Great Falls. He was dead in like a year. He just fell back. But you look at the power of the Red Road and these different philosophies that our Indian people connect to. It's always around the culture. I didn't go back to it, still I went through my ups and downs, you know? But immerse education in the culture of the community and regularly connect our youth in the schools. So what we're doing with the MBI grants is we're looking to connect our kids to some of these philosophies, some of these practices in school climate, connecting them to that better way of life, to help them process through the night, help them process through some of the struggles and really start to look at who they are. Talking with some of the folks when we're looking at changing the approach of the MBI, we were talking about the fact that so much of our school climate, our discipline strategies are a reaction. And we react to a kid. He gets detention, he gets this and that. And so many of our tribal ways were preparation. You get up and you pray, you welcome that son to say, hey, prepare me for what is to come. These kind of things. I didn't learn that until I was 25. So when we started to talk about school climate and how can we change this for our students, it all comes down to this. You look at what happened during the boarding schools. A different culture was brought in and pushed through a system that changed a path of our people. And I was sitting there with Susan Bay. I said, why can't we use the school to start to reconnect our kids to those things? If they're expected to go see a behavioral health specialist, why can't they go sit with an elder too? Because our kids respond to this stuff. And this is the key component of it all. And that's free. You know, we have so many resources in our Indian communities. We have so many elders. We have so many people out there with knowledge that is often getting lost because they pass away. And we can start to connect those kids, those elders into the youth, those practices into the schools to not only help the school climate, but center our students in who they are. I found this picture last year. But that's sometimes how our school looks. You know, it's westernized philosophies. And somebody asked me about this, and I said, well, imagine if China took over and some people went underground, kept a lot of their culture and languages, and then in 1978 they were now allowed to practice those culture and languages, but there was still a school that was practicing Chinese culture sitting in the middle. So there's been all these discussions, and it's an exciting time now that we're starting to look at bringing some of our tribal practices and approaches into the school system. Denise Juneau's sitting there. We have a Native American in that position. And in a lot of the work that we're doing, we're kind of picking up where the federal government has failed on providing education to BIA. We're lucky enough in the state of Montana that we have Denise pushing a lot of the funding towards helping our American Indian schools. This is what we continue to try to do, and it's not working a lot of times. Square peg in a round hole. Yeah, when you're out there and you see these students in their own settings, they listen, they're respectful, they're comfortable. So this is what we're really looking to do. And in a lot of ways, confuse our kids. They're respectful in those settings. They're respectful around sweetgrass or smudge. But we want to start to confuse them on where they're at, you know. So they're not going to act up if those things are happening. They're not going to act up if elders are there. So looking at MBI, if you guys are familiar, there's these universals, there's these values, there's all of these things. Well, in each one of our tribes have values. They have, you know, the knowledge of things that they pass on. I think this is out of Lakota. So we started those discussions. Now comes in Hayes Lodgepole. We sat with Tuffy, Raina, we sat with elders throughout that reservation, and it didn't take long, because we're not bringing anything new. All we're doing is allowing our people to do what they know how to do. You don't need any buy-in. You don't need any of that, because they took it and ran with it. They threw their societies in. You talk about mentoring, you talk about bullying. Our tribes have ways of handling it. Those becoming a woman ceremonies, becoming a man ceremonies, those are all out there. This is where I will be probably visiting with a lot of you. We want to do it the correct way. We want to do it the right way. And it's been a process to go from that pedagogy to a lot of our ways. A lot of the meetings, well, at least one or two of them out of Hayes, they had a meeting and ran it in a tribal way. You know, with folks from all walks of life talking about the school, and they did it in a tribal way, where everybody was able to say something. And they had a good discussion. And that tension dropped. And they walked out together. We have so much of that stuff out there. So we brought in elders from across the state last February. And just to talk about these, to have a discussion on what are some ways that we can deal with kids in a tier 1 level, tier 2. I put this together. Someone told me that, Donnie, why are you putting all that stuff in their triangle? I thought you were going to do it tribal way with the circle. And I said, I put it like this because that's how they see it. So I translated it into this. But you look at some of these things. We sat down and visited for 2 days. Talked about how changing a westernized word or an approach and just turning it into what it would be in our languages, that's not what we're trying to do. Some folks would say, well, get a feather and put respect on it. That's culture. Put it on the wall. And I'm like, no, talk about the feather. Quit tokenizing sacred items and saying it's culture. Talk about that feather. Talk about what it means to be humble, what it means to be respectful, what it means to have courage. Again, Hayes Lodgepole brought in folks. They brought in their elders and sat kids down, and I think the meeting went 4 hours. Right?
Not a word from the students. They are staff really respectful, but I think one of the strongest parts of that is people and what to expect and what they might say. And then they went out and they came up with the elder list that they equal Ani and Dakota, and then they went out and offered tobacco. And then it was, and then plus also that traditional feeding ceremony. So all of our teachers, the teachers and staff, they brought traditional foods, and then our boys gave kind of our food and traditional. So it was like there was a lot of all kinds of different teachings in there in that one day, but it kind of led up to it, and it was really, really good. And also our elders that came in, they were really happy, and they were like, a lot of them said they never did that before. That was their first time doing it. There's only, I don't even think that there was one that said that they did that before. And they would take turns, and then each took turns speaking, and then they would remember something that they wanted to say, and they would come back and they would add more. It was really helpful for the elders too, that they was able to teach. Those were those students' relatives that were speaking. So those students that that were sitting there, that was their grandma and that was their grandpa up there, they were really proud too.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So this is what we're looking at doing. And there's a lot happening out there. From those early discussions, we met with elders from various communities. We looked at the indirect consultant list and realized there's no natives on that list. So we were able to hire some and train them to become MBI consultants. And we're in the process of doing that. But there's a lot going on across the United States, across the world, that maybe if I send this out, you can hit these links. You look at a lot of this. I was at a meeting last week on suicide prevention, and they kept bringing up restorative justice, and I said, that's a tribal approach. That's talking circles. Those are all tribal things. And it's funny how people take a lot of the tribal practices and then put their name on it, and now it's okay. We think about that. So all of these things that are happening, meditation in schools, yoga, that's a culture from somewhere. And so we're having they're kind of hard discussions on why can't our tribal people do what they do. If they're allowed to do yoga, they should be allowed to do what their tribe does to calm down or to relax or to process through a tough night. So I'm working with some folks on developing kind of a side-by-side of things. So we look at some of this. They always say, where's the data on if this will work? And I always bring up the fact you got 30 years of data on what doesn't work, yet we still keep trying. So why not try something different? You'll have full buy-in. It's going to take a while, because one of the hardest things is to have some of our elders believe that they're going to be allowed to come into a school. There's a lot of processing, a lot of discussion. We did a lot of that in Hayes. In prior, I've met with 3 elders. One of them was saying, I said, you get the kids out, if you ever come into school and spoke? And they're like, yeah, but the kids get antsy after 10, 15 minutes. I said, well, did you do it in your way? Did you set it up in the way you do out of school? Like, I don't know what you do, but, light smudge, light whatever, started like that. And he's like, no. I said, do you do that out of school with students? And he's like, yeah, I've had my grandkids. I said, do they get up and leave? He's like, no. So that's what we're looking at, doing it your way there, so they'll sit and listen. In Browning, I had a guy, I won't say his name, you guys probably know who he is, but kept coming. He goes, well, what you need to do is you need to teach those kids how to sing. You need to get those kids to learn the drum. You need to get them to do this. And I said, I'm not doing any of it. I'm going to come to you and I'm going to ask you to volunteer to do this. This ain't coming from outside. You're going to be able to do this. And I got that Yoda. You must unlearn what you have learned. So many of our people have been told that our ways weren't right. And we've been dealing with it. That's why I went through all that history. And to have us to start to realize that no, it is right. And it fits in right with the scope of meaningfulness in schools, in school climate. And you look at that, the MBI in the structure and the format of it, it relates directly to what our tribal people do. So these are kind of the things that we're doing. It's taking time. We got some pretty solid people out there working. We're learning a lot from the school districts, and each school district will be different because it will come from them. And all we're really doing is I joke, is I say, we're boxing out Western strategies so our natives can come in and get to rebound with their stuff. That's all we're doing. But, we're discussing it. Since I think I'm being recorded. But it's simple, and we're seeing some amazing things. It could be a fluke, but I always say we might as well try, because we've been doing this one way for 30 years. Not only will the school climate change, it'll also be connecting our kids to who they are, and hopefully their life will change. Hopefully we'll be able to have them come in and meet with elders and learn some of that knowledge that is being lost. So that's my presentation. Are there any questions?
Religion. When you brought up the tobacco, it's associated with the religion, smoking, like.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you separate religion from school?
Gotta go back to this.
The first thing that you learn is respect the religion, and the elders have a lot of religion.
Yeah.
Based on it. All the teachings are based on it.
I think in a lot of discussions we talk about way of life. A lot of that, even talking with elders, it's a way of life. I think it's been categorized in religion. It just depends on who you talk to, but this is where we're looking at, if these folks are allowed to light incense and meditate and yoga, then why not start the discussions? Because church and state comes up a lot. And we're going to deal with that, but they're doing it in different ways. They're doing it using different cultures. It's like, there's some schools out there, Hutterite colonies, and Jewish schools that have 2 hours that are strictly their culture. And they're allowed to do it in this country. So it's more of like, why can't we do that? And I know those things will come up. And that's why we've got to take it slow and make sure that we have everybody at the table and talk it through. I think we had kind of a hiccup with the students. Do you mind if I share some of that? During American Indian Heritage Week, the students went to Hayes Lodgepole and built a sweat lodge and did it the proper way. They were taught the entire time how to do these things. And it came up, but there's an excitement behind it that because it was brought up that, well, a sweat lodge, you can't be doing that during school hours, things like that. But I think you guys turned it into like curriculum development.
It's actually part of our curriculum. I don't really know what your question is specifically, but our school is the only public school within the exterior boundaries of our reservation. And so because we feel we can practice our culture and we can incorporate that into our class day and into our curriculum. I don't think
So do you pray before you start a
We
board
do,
meeting?
we pray every day.
Board meeting?
Excuse me?
Before a board meeting?
We sometimes, but not all the time. I mean, this
Is it allowed?
This is, oh yeah, it's allowed, it's promoted.
Is it?
During the school day, we do it with our students as a student body. So I think that's probably part of the decolonization process, is that we don't need permission to do that. That's our school, located within the exterior boundaries of our reservation, and we don't need permission to practice our culture.
Because culture and religion are really different. Religion's like a church, and culture is what we practice, and spirituality is part of culture, but so is your language and your ceremonies and everything else. So they're really different. When you look at the church and state thing, that's a church. This is not a church. Church and state, but not culture and state.
Well, praying is.
Yeah, but we don't need permission to be able to pray in our own native languages and to teach our students how to do that. We don't need permission to do that. And so it's part of our curriculum, it's part of our day, it's part of our practices, and we believe that if we're going to change the course of the outcomes of our students, the only way to do that is through culture.
Also language and your culture and spirituality, they go hand in hand, and we teach both of our languages at our school. And so if by saying, we couldn't teach our language if we would abide by that law. We couldn't teach our native language if we would abide by that, because there's a spiritual connection there.
You brought up the reason that there's respect for elders is because of their religion and the direct relationship with the elders. And
They have
they're
their
the student, like me, I know, I respect the elders because of their religion. It's the religion that I connect with.
And I think a lot of times, you guys have morning reflections, you know, looking at some of these models, there's a lot of things that we can do that would be wrong. At the kind of level.
Well, what I was going to say, Donnie, is I think everybody has a policy in their policy book that says that, you can't do certain things. And if you don't force students, you can actually give them the opportunity, but you can't force or coerce students to do that. So that's the issue. So if you're doing a meditation, if you allow Catholics to do their things and whoever, you're providing an opportunity for everyone, but you don't say, we're going to make you do this. You say it's there for you. Because we used to smudge when I was in Ireland as a superintendent principal. We used to have an offering in the morning to smudge. We'd go by the pole in the morning, and those that wanted to do it did it. If you didn't, you weren't ostracized or anything else. But we also had time for reflection. We had the word of the day. We had all those kind of things back in the day when I was in the school. So I think it's how you do it, and as long as you're following the proper protocol and you're not infringing on or putting your beliefs on another student, then I think you're okay.
And that's kind of what came up, is offer it. Always offer it. It's not mandatory. And each tribe would be different. But I think in a lot of ways, there's a lot of excitement around this to at least start these discussions. And you see what happens when we have those immersion camps for a week, and how excited the kids are, but what are they going to be doing for 51 weeks after that if they don't have that connection at home? A lot of the things that are happening here on a daily basis, where students are coming in, they're singing their flag songs, their honor songs, they're bringing a lot of good feelings to the school. And I think there's been a shift in Hays Lodge. Well, we're having discussions in Hart Butte. We visited with quite a few folks, and we're going to continue to have these discussions. We're not going to do anything until everybody's in and wants to maybe look at these type of approaches.
So Donnie, you said you started hiring folks. So where are you with, which districts have an Indigenous MBI consultant and which don't?
I think we're going by the grant. So I think this first round, we're looking to bring somebody from Fraser. So we'll be visiting, I was kind of listening with you guys on that. Hayes is there. We need to find somebody for Heartview, but we want to have those discussions. We have somebody in Pryor, it's the Indigenous consultant.
So when you speak about the grant pretty much outlines which districts you approach about this concept.
It's by year.
I didn't hear Lodgegrass or Lake Deer mentioned, for instance, so if they're interested, what options are available?
I think if anything, if we have American Indian consultant coming out to our schools, they bring a lot of knowledge just from living in that world. And we're training them to be MBI consultants when there wasn't anything like that before. So we're looking to bring folks out to Langer.
And what's pretty cool about Lodgeville right now is the MBI consultant is from our tribe, and our administration is from our tribe, and our school board, all of our board members are from our tribe. They're all tribe members. So I think that dynamic really speaks to what is occurring right now.
They've had a lot of, I mean, even some of the data that we're seeing compared to last year, the write-ups have dropped by like 70%. Your attendance is up in the 80s and 90s. So yeah, that's going to be a tough discussion, but I'd rather start having those discussions than continue going down the path that we're at with a lot of our schools. You know? Any other questions?
Just a comment. As far as the whole church and state thing, there is a way around that. If we've got on the books in the state of Montana, go down the path that Idaho, Utah, Nevada has done with release time, therefore giving the students a choice and getting somebody from the tribal elders to administer those controversial, whether they be religious versus non-religious customs of the tribe and culture. They've done it very successfully in those states for many years. So there is that option if that's on the books as statute in the state of Montana.
And then you guys do that before school officially starts. I know that's in the morning. When you offer that before school starts. So.
I'm on the college board, and we always have her at the college board. There's a reason. Pray. Some are pray in English, and they've got their ways, like they've got a different church. I pray my way, and that's my church. But I come to the school board, and it's not allowed.
But Clay,
It's different.
we might also feel a little bit more comfortable because our superintendent of schools, of our school district, he's one of our large keepers, and our Ani instructor is also a large keeper, and our Nakota instructor, he's the main helper of our Nakota Lodge, and so we have a lot of guidance. And then also one of our school board members, the flat pipe keeper, and so we have a lot of guidance, and I think that leadership and we know we're not doing things wrong because they're right there with us all the, every step of the way. So I think that also brings us a lot of comfort, and the students also. So I think we probably would I was thinking about it, and I probably think we would be as as comfortable if they weren't there for us, right, in our school system or every day. You know, that we could go to them and, we know we're doing things right.
And you guys have also brought in your societies and linked them to attendance and discipline and behavior. And they honor the kids in your traditional way of honoring, don't you?
Yep.
Different societies have different roles.
And that's what's taught through that process, is they're taught those roles and the rights that they have with the rules. And so that's part of the curriculum, it's part of the incentive, that's part of teaching behavior.
So yeah, it's a work in progress. We've only been discussing for about a year and a half. And I appreciate everybody's input on this and what your thoughts are. I think we have a lot of kids out there that could benefit from understanding some of these things, and they're not getting it at home. But thank you guys for having me come on.
Thanks, Donnie. I think we'll probably have to invite you back as this project grows. I know it really helped me to better understand not only the history of it, but what it is you're trying to do, and which I think is terrific. So thanks, we appreciate you making the trip to town. Anything else before Donnie leaves? Thoughts, questions? You're going to send me your PowerPoint, correct?
Yeah.
And then I'll distribute it on, so you will get that. We desperately want you to fill out the evaluation form. Some of you might have picked it up off the table already out there. We have a few other copies if you didn't pick it up. We need to know what worked for you, what didn't work for you, and what you want us to do differently. We are at your behest, and we're having you guide us, so we really need your input. Also, those of you that did not get your credit renewal sheet, I know Victoria, you were late. If you want renewal credits, we have a form for you for renewal credits. Anybody else interested